Hey, everybody. Welcome to PDQ Live. Today, we're going to talk about compliance with special guest Julian, who's going to help us maybe think of compliance in a new light, or maybe help you think with some self-reflection, some questions on what you should be doing and when.
Or why.
Or why.
Yes.
Right. The first question is why. So today, let's maybe start with the first question that we wanted to have here, and it's, should we even be considering compliance? And should you be considering compliance?
Yeah. What's your industry? What's your business? Is it worth the money?
Yeah. And I think Julian and I have had this conversation a handful of times as we've evaluated compliance and stuff at PDQ. And maybe, Jules, you have some thoughts on those first initial questions you should be asking yourself.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I feel like for a lot of people, if you're in an industry that is regulated, it's going to come one time or another, basically organically. But for a lot of other people, it's like there are lots of industries where having compliance can kind of change what you're able to do. And the industries like finance and healthcare and telecom and these days, really any industry where you're kind of providing a service over the internet, because as time goes on and as the internet becomes a more and more scary place, people are more and more mindful of whether or not they can trust an organization that they're engaging with. Any service, really, even if it's like, a business or if it's something like Netflix, right? We read about breaches all the time. We read about cybersecurity, even if you're not in the industry. So the conversation about whether or not you should engage with it is something where I feel like it's just becoming a more common conversation for everyone to have. So, basically, it all comes back to most of compliance is tied back to risk and trying to assess whether or not you feel comfortable offering the service that you do, or being in the space that you're in a way where the way that you're, firstly, internally handling your cybersecurity is appropriate, like you are avoiding as much risk as you want, but also that you can prove to other people that that's what you're doing. They don't have to take your word for it, that you can demonstrate that.
Yeah, I think maybe like a distinction to make here is compliance shouldn't be the forcing function for your cybersecurity policy. I think compliance and these different frameworks we might talk about are really like to show that you've made a formal effort, right? But they shouldn't be the thing that's forcing you to go implement like proper controls.
Well, how many of them do you think you're doing already? That's my question to you. Like, what are these controls? Tell me some of them.
We can talk about multi-factor authentication or maybe encryption of data at rest and in transit. But a lot of those come back to the type of data and the services that you're offering.
Okay.
So that first risk analysis, right? Maybe my service that I'm providing allows you to sign up to get an email about, the weather.
Okay.
So what the amount of risk that is involved there is I might have an email address. That level of risk is very different than if I was asking you to pay me for that same service. Because now I have your name, your address, probably email, payment details. That level of risk just grew exponentially. So I think that first question is like, what is the service that I offer? What is the classification of data that I have? And then maybe what are the laws that govern it?
Based on my industry.
Or the type of data you've got, or where you're operating.
Even down the path that Josh was talking about, payments is a really interesting one because there's lots of different ways to do payments. And one of the things you can do is you can handle payments yourself. You can take credit card information, you can keep credit card information. And if you do that, you actually do need to get, like legally speaking, you do need to get a special certification, PCI DSS, to be able to do that kind of transaction. So even something that Josh's kind of weird example about an email letter about the weather is like something where it could be all the way from a completely benign service with very little risk, but as soon as you decide that you want to offer payment to your customers in a particular way and you want to handle that, now you're a hugely risky service for someone to engage with if you're not doing it in a compliant way. So.
I think it's like it becomes this layered thing, right? And we have this graphic that kind of overlays like where these different things kind of intersect. And if we can show that what's on the screen here, we can talk about our silly weather example of, in the very beginning, we probably are only have like this consumer privacy type stuff, but we don't have payment stuff. So we might exist here if we're offering the service in California, for example.
That's the CCPA.
That's the CCPA.
Okay, that's California.
Yeah. And then maybe we pop over to, and we want to offer this to someone in Germany, right? Maybe we want to offer German weather.
So global.
Now all of a sudden we're GDPR and we're dealing with GDPR sensitive data. Like we have customer data that's in Germany, and that's a larger superset of the California Consumer Privacy Act.
Okay.
And these just kind of build on top of each other the riskier you go. And maybe we can talk through like this next layer, which seems to be very popular in the United States, which is SOC 2.
Well, I have questions. So I see CCPAs in the middle here. Is that intentional? Are there things I'm doing that overlap for both of these certifications, you guys?
Oh, yes, totally.
Like what?
One of the things that's interesting about, specifically with CCPA and GDPR, those mostly concern things like obtaining consent to store people's information, and how the information dictate the way in which information must be stored, the right that customers have to have their information deleted, and so on and so forth. There's some real commonality between CCPA and GDPR, with GDPR being a little more strict and a little more comprehensive than CCPA. And the diagram we have is kind of illustrated thusly so that you can see that a lot of these frameworks, is what they're called, are like sort of like they share a lot of common controls. They share a lot of like the same principles and are sort of implemented in a slightly broader way, or maybe a more restrictive or stricter way. And so SOC 2 is a framework which is it's not like the Consumer Privacy Acts like GDPR and CCPA. It's a much more general, much more broad-reaching framework that addresses cybersecurity in a very general sense for internet service providers or cloud service providers in general. But then we have a lot of other considerations that also sort of intersect here. CCPA is one that's obviously just local to California, whereas GDPR is European. SOC 2 is a certification which is particular to America, but ISO, a slightly more broad-reaching but also general cybersecurity compliance framework, is internationally recognized, whereas you have this other one that we've got illustrated here, FEDRAMP, which is a compliance framework that you have to complete if you want to engage in several ways with the American federal government. Quite strict, doesn't have complete overlap with ISO, but it does have some other requirements of its own that are more complicated than quite a few other high-level cybersecurity frameworks that if you want to work in that space or have customers in that space, you have to complete. And what we're trying to show with that diagram is basically that a lot of the principles are held in common between these frameworks, and how far out that ring you want to go in terms of complexity, and whether or not one of the frameworks is specific to a particular industry concern. Like, not pictured there would be something like HIPAA, a framework that deals not just with cybersecurity but also with something like patient privacy in the healthcare industry. And a lot of those things don't really apply to people who aren't in the healthcare industry, but it also still has a lot in common with those fundamental frameworks.
So, Jules, I have a question. The patient privacy policy for HIPAA, how is that going to be different than some of the other ones you mentioned? Just curious. I don't actually know.
It's mainly concerning data retention and the specific standards for storing data. It's also about how the data is, like, there's different classifications of data and different types of PII which are included in that.
Okay.
I'm not like an expert in HIPAA either, so I don't really know, because we haven't really had to concern ourselves with it either. But
so I want to ask a question that you talked about earlier, because it actually came up here, and I thought it was a really kind of funny example that we talked about. When you were here for PDQ Week, we talked about FEDRAMP, and it was just such a simple example of a pain point that you might encounter. You were looking into FEDRAMP for us, right? And we have a few other security frameworks in place. But one of the requirements for FEDRAMP is that you can't use flash drives, right? Except you're going to talk about this. But that was a big surprise. I was like, what? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, why don't we talk about, like, let's just use PDQ as an example.
Okay.
I think we can do that and kind of our approach to these different frameworks.
Okay.
Right. FEDRAMP is one of those that is kind of a big one. Like,
Yeah.
you're not wrong. It's a big one. It's a big bite to take. But if you look back at our solar system,
Yep.
as Brig has called it, which
I
I
like it.
absolutely love.
Look how cute Jules is. Look at Jules.
Look at how many other frameworks you can start at,
Yeah.
that you need to start at, and work your way to it so you're not looking up at Mount Everest.
Yeah, you're kind of mapping it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like this PDQ example, right? American company, operate in Europe, have European PII. Okay. Immediately GDPR. Right. Immediately we have to comply
We're
with that.
legally obligated to do that.
Yeah. Then and some of these frameworks, if you remember, some of them are prescriptive, as in you must do these things. Others, like SOC 2, give guidelines but don't tell you exactly how to do it.
Okay, but question, how did you guys know that? How did you know where to start?
This guy is brilliant. Jules is brilliant.
Yeah, how did you know, Jules, where to begin?
Just a lot of research. I didn't know where to begin. That's the honest truth.
Okay.
I got
Well,
I got told we're going to do SOC 2 one day, and then it was just a bunch of learning. But there's lots of good resources on the internet and all that for that sort of thing. But what Josh says is correct. It's really interesting how different. Even the implementation of these different things is very different. And SOC 2 is very much a framework that says, convince an auditor that the security practices in this sphere, let's call it like password complexity, or let's call it like backup or disaster recovery or encryption, convince me that the way in which you have implemented that control makes sense for your business and mitigates risk accordingly. And that's basically what you have to do. That there are some hard requirements, like, encryption has to be of this particular level of complexity and that sort of thing. You have to have backups in a different location than the original machine, basic stuff. But then beyond that, you have a lot of latitude to decide exactly what makes the most sense for your organization. So, as Josh was saying, there are other, like something like FEDRAMP is a lot more prescriptive about it, and says things like you can't use removable media that hasn't been like essentially validated to have been come from inside the organization or can be identified as being owned by an individual. So if you have a flash drive and it exists in the building, it could have come from anywhere, it could belong to anyone, it could have anything on it. That is strictly forbidden under this particular framework, the FedRAMP one.
Yeah.
So, yes, there's a lot of variation in how these work.
The funniest part about this story, though, is the person that was talking to Jules about really wanting FedRAMP based on the customers he'd been talking to was literally holding a flash drive in his hand.
Yeah.
I'm not joking. We were laughing.
Yeah.
It gets funny because as you start to introduce these compliance frameworks that have these rules, you're going to run into this XY conundrum over and over and over again.
Can you stop with the, okay, what does XY mean?
XY is, in a nutshell, you originally have a problem. And so you hypothesize a solution. And you run into a problem with your solution. So you go and ask for help about your solution rather than presenting the actual problem for help. Right. So in this case, why is someone using a flash drive? Well, the actual problem here is I need to get files from A to B. But you're saying, I can't use a flash drive anymore. My life is ruined. So as you're a person that is implementing these frameworks, you have to be consciously reframing problems and taking a step back and being like, your problem isn't that you can't use a flash drive.
Yeah.
Your problem is that now the way that your solution is now broken.
Yeah.
And so you need to be able to offer a alternative solution. You have to reframe these problems all the time.
But I'm guessing you got to think about these things before you even begin getting these certifications, yes?
Well, there are also going to be things that come up that you may not be aware of. And Josh and I have talked about this. For example, when we're shooting video, these files are huge. We store them on an external hard drive, essentially, or an SD card. We have to get our media to the machine so we can edit it. So that's a problem if we were doing FedRAMP that we would have to overcome.
Yeah, and it becomes this like beautiful thing between a compliance officer like Jules and IT and the people that you're serving needing to do work, right? So in this case, Kelly comes to me and says, hey, IT, I have these big files to move around. I know that we're engaging in these compliance efforts. So then I go to Julie and I'm like, hey, you know these guidelines. Help me brainstorm a way we can do this in a compliant way.
Yeah.
What are we allowed to do?
Yeah. Help me fix this.
I'm just going to guess. You don't like compliance. I'm just going to guess. Do you?
I understand. I understand compliance.
Josh respects compliance,
I do.
Yeah.
as one should.
I do. I hope there's no like auditors on this call
They're
or
watching.
anybody from like the
Let me write this down. Let me write this down.
But like AIC, is it AICPA? Whatever, the accountants.
Yeah.
Let's start with
is
that.
so
The
weird.
accountants that define SOC II,
capital
they seem to lag a little behind like the rest of the industry.
Really?
Yeah.
I thought accountants love
So
that
like
crap.
you might end up with something that's like, here's like a benign example that was probably from 10 years ago. Do you remember when it was like, you must rotate your password every 30 days?
But then they change that all the time, though.
Right? But that may have been
Also-
a control.
Okay.
And it's
Right.
been proven time and time again that by doing that, you're going to force at more bad behaviors, more insecure behaviors. So you end up having to implement these controls
Yeah.
that don't necessarily make sense. So that's my biggest gripe with
Yeah.
compliance.
Okay.
Yeah, the field is changing constantly, and therefore prescribing a solution to a problem is really difficult game to play, right? Because as Josh was just saying, like what used to be considered the gold standard for how you implemented password security is suddenly like, actually, you literally don't do what we told you, you'll be doing better. And that's a difficult position for someone to be in who's implementing something to be like, okay, I have to do this thing that's worse now. Why?
Yeah.
So
Am I the only one that thinks internal audits are super fun? I love that stuff.
Yeah.
you might be the only one, Sarah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you are. Like Mike just said, like Mike just had to change their password age from 90 to 30 days. I can almost guarantee that when you implement that, someone somewhere along the way, instead of having a complex password, is going to do something like this. They're going to look down at this keyboard and they're going to go, this is stupid. So I'm going to make my password 1QAZ, 2WSX. I'm going to hold the shift key and I'm going to do the same thing again. No. And that looks like a very...
There's people who use that password.
Yeah, that's a very complex like password by a computer
It meets the
standard.
requirements.
It meets all the requirements, but it's like silly. And if you're going to do like a dictionary attack or some brute force attack, I guarantee that top of that word list is going to be keyword patterns.
Okay.
Right?
Well, so let me ask you guys this.
Yeah.
What's the best way to roadmap, and maybe we can put this back up, the graphic back up. What's the best way to roadmap these certifications or these frameworks for your business? I mean, I know you guys talked about, I have to consider what's my business. I know we haven't talked about money, but obviously money comes into play because this is not cheap, right?
It's a big one.
It's a big one, but
Well, I mean, on both sides of the equation, Tara, I mean, like money that you're going to spend to get the certifications and also potential money that you're leaving on the table by not engaging with customers who require or desire you to have those certifications too. I think that how much you stand to, like how your company stands to benefit from it isn't just a brand thing, right? It's not just people are going to trust me more because I have this badge now. It's that there are a lot of customers who legitimately won't seek a deal with particularly an organization like us that provides a high-risk cloud-provided service if we don't have something to back it up that's tangible. To say, in order to say that we do all this stuff too.
Yeah.
So,
And like, it makes sense for us, like we're a SOC 2 compliant organization.
yeah.
And when we engage with vendors, that's now another concern for us. Like now we all have to be playing the
Yeah.
SOC 2 game,
Yeah.
which is effectively serving its purpose. But again, just because you have a badge on your site doesn't mean that you're technically safe.
We learned in the last webcast that that's kind of meaningless, that you need to actually get the certificate sent to you. We learned that in the last webcast. Question.
Right.
This messes me up. Why is it called ISO 27001? I thought ISO was something totally different. Why is it called that?
I don't know.
Jules, I think, knows.
So the International Standards Organization is what ISO stands for. Is an organization which is international, and guess what they make? Standards.
Okay.
All of them. Lots and lots
All
and
of
lots of them. And it turns out that they aren't very good at naming things. and they name every single thing that they might make ISO, and then a string of numbers. And in the case of like this isn't just for like technology either. It's like all sorts of hardware and all sorts of other things too that the ISO makes standards for. But they decided that the designation for cybersecurity would be 27,000, and so resultantly there are a number of certifications under there: 27,001, 27,000, and guess what? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and they all have different areas in which they are specifically addressing. But 27,001, which is the sort of like the daddy one, covers the most broadly all of the components which people tend to be concerned with regards to cybersecurity these days, and so that's the one that people normally get.
So these, this global, I'm going to call them the global Illuminati, do IT governance. They're not just particularly good at naming things, right?
Doesn't seem like it.
Okay.
Doesn't seem like it.
Not their strong suit.
Okay, not their strong
Standards, yes,
suit.
naming, no.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to ask another question. Pretend like we don't have a Jules and a Josh. We don't have a brain trust. Are there organizations that you can pay to help you along your path of getting these certifications, you guys?
Oh, for sure. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. There's lots of There's lots of people who sell this because of its complexity and because of exactly the problem that you're talking about. And actually, interestingly, Tara, a lot of people who find themselves in a position where they need to get into this game now aren't even really what you would expect. They're not the huge enterprise organizations so much anymore. They often do have an already established legal team, an already established governance team, and they can ramp up on that stuff pretty well. But SMBs and, sort of like small businesses, basically, they are becoming, because, like I said at the very head of this, because the internet is becoming a scarier place and people are getting hacked all the time and data breaches are a real concern. And cloud-based services, even if you sell a weather newsletter or whatever, are increasingly likely to be part of the infrastructure that you need to support your business operations. Even if you're not a tech company and you sell stuff, you're probably going to have a website that sells the thing that you sell. So now you're implicated as well, not just in consumer privacy law, but also if you do e-commerce, then yada, 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 right?
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to say is that a lot of these organizations are small, like sub 50 people. They're not going to have a compliance officer. They're not going to have a legal team. So it's very common to go to either a cloud service that provides a sort of out of the box, we'll get you a certification in 6 months, which is of dubious merit, or go with a group that's basically like a consultancy that will help you, like you can partner with, that will help you get there. That approach is very common and often a collaborative thing where they'll basically come and interview you and learn all about your organization and tell you what you need to do to get to where you need to be.
Yeah, we did that here at PDQ. When GDPR started looming and getting closer and closer and closer, it was interesting. It was almost an entire cottage industry just sprung up of people saying, "Hey, we'll get you ready for GDPR." And so we started down one road, and then eventually I think we did contract out to an organization. And the interview process that you're talking about, Jules, it was tedious, but we got through it.
Yeah, and you learn this
whole... Are you saying
whole...
that compliance work is tedious, Callie? Is that the implication there?
I don't think it even needs to be said. It's just implied.
Yeah, it's tedious, and then you also pick up this whole new vocabulary. You start learning the very nitty-gritty differences between what is a data controller or a data processor. And on the surface, you're like, what? Why?
I don't know, but that sounds amazing to me. But I love to listen to the Brain Trust talk, but we have 2 bingos.
Already?
Woo!
Yay, 2 bingos.
Wow, really?
We did
I wasn't even trying.
There's like 10 bingos.
There's 10 bingos?
But yeah,
10?
Oh, okay. I'm going to let Andrew.
10, maybe 8 to 10.
Okay, Andrew's going to decide the bingos. Never mind. I'm going to stop talking right now.
It's in Discord. We can't see Discord right now.
I'm going to stop talking. We can't see it.
So
keep going.
Maybe for our last few minutes here, we kind of pull back the curtain.
Okay, pull back the curtain.
And let's talk about how we're currently thinking about compliance at PDQ and what we're currently engaging in and kind of what we're thinking as next.
Okay.
So Jules, if you want to kind of set the stage, here's where we are today and here's kind of what we're thinking of next and why.
Well, we already are SOC II certified. And that's something that we want to continue to uphold. So that's something obviously that requires you to basically recertify on whatever cadence you feel like, because SOC 2 it rolls that way. But that's one of the things on our radar. We're doing business in Europe, so we have to remain GDPR compliant. We have been continuing to make our GDPR implementation more sophisticated. The wonderful world of consumer privacy acts in America, where there's now some 35 different acts on the horizon, which are coming up. I think that one of the complexities there is that depending on how much business you do in each state, you may or may not be subject to those laws. So I've got a horrible Excel spreadsheet that is basically I'm using to track when those laws come into effect, whether or not they affect us, what the specific requirements are for each one. Are they opt-in? Are they opt-out? Blah, blah, blah. As the months roll on and these come into effect, then we have to stay on top of that as well. And then also, as we were saying earlier, since we're doing more business in Europe, and that's one of the things that we're primarily targeting in 2024, we are looking to ISO and ISO 27001 and how we might approach that, if that makes sense for us. And then again, as we alluded to, we've got some interest from customers who would require FEDRAMP, so that's a fairly significant undertaking as well. And trying to plot out, given that we're already SOC 2 compliant, what is the most sensible path we can take that has overlap with what we've already achieved? How can we build our compliance stance in a kind of additive way that's going to give us benefit as we go and helps us achieve long-term goals in parallel as we build that up?
Yeah, so
that's generally what I'm thinking about.
As like an operator, the way you might operationalize this thing, right, is you have your hard requirements. For us, that was CCPA GDPR SOC II. So our next step as we look at business objectives and we try and keep up with the business is we do, I guess what's called in the industry, a gap analysis. It's like, here's where we are now, here's where we need to go, and here's the delta. And then you have to sell this almost internally, right? Because you're going to ask people to do things that they don't want to do.
Right.
You might put hurdles in front of them.
Like give up their USB drives.
Give up their USB drives. And so you have to be like, hey, this is the juice is worth the squeeze, right? This is the stuff we have to change. And then you move to that next one. And as Jules was saying, we move additive. It's like boiling a frog. If we jumped in feet first, right, into FedRAMP, that hurts really bad. But if we start small and build incrementally, then it doesn't hurt so much. Right?
I'm still trying to recover from the frog comment.
The frog just thinks it's in a nice little
It's in
warm
a hot
bath.
tub.
You know
It's in
the
a hot
rules.
tub.
You know the rules about animals. Okay, 2 questions and a comment for Jules and you, of course. Tim wants to know
You, of course.
if you regret going into security. That was a comment earlier from Tim, also in security.
Thanks for framing that differently, because that was deep.
That was horrible. And then second question from Marcel is, does your head hurt from all the requirements? And then a comment for me is, can I see your spreadsheet, Jules?
I will show it to you later.
Okay, thank you. No, I mean, yeah, later, just for me.
There was actually one additional comment I wanted to share, because it's a positive spin on this. He says a business requirement for compliance can be the driver IT needs to get funding and efforts approved when it's otherwise seen as an unnecessary cost by those with the purse strings. So Chris D gave us that comment.
Yeah.
Well, great observation.
Totally agree.
Yeah, I would caution a little bit there, using compliance as a stick, as a weapon, can do some stuff culturally, internally, that you don't want. So just be careful with that, right? You don't want to use SOC 2 as a weapon. You don't want to use ISO as a weapon. Because what happens is, as you put in these controls, if you don't have buy-in, I guarantee everyone in that org will try every way they can to sneak around them.
Yeah.
And they will. You can't see everything.
And that can get you in. It's true. Yeah, I mean, I think it can be a great way for an organization to mature, and a great way if you already have the expectation that you want your backups to work this way, you want your file stores to work this way, that you can actually implement it in a way where you have great consistency, and if you do have organizational buy-in, then everyone can be on the same page. But as Josh was saying, if the culture isn't permissive of that, then it can be really complicated.
Well, that's why you plan it out, like you said.
Yeah.
You stage it out. You got to get management buy-in.
Yeah.
Always.
Get the buy-in,
always.
yeah.
And it's not always just management buy-in either.
Team buy-in.
You have to bring everyone along.
Yeah.
Everyone has to come along on this journey.
It affects everyone.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Also, let's make this clarifying statement today and every day in the future. Always animals above people. Duh.
No, I just love the fact Tara has no problem firing somebody, but heaven forbid a frog sits in a hot tub.
That's correct.
Yeah, I'll choose my words more carefully next time.
I will plug my ears and run off the set if you talk about hurting animals.
Alrighty. Do we have any other questions? Any kind of final thoughts here as we had talked about compliance? Tara, Jules, anything?
No, I still want my audio book of Jules talking. That's it. You?
Yeah. Zoom meetings with Julian are the highlight of my week.
They really are.
Yeah, I have to remember to listen to the words he's saying and not just his voice.
I know. I'm just sitting there listening.
So, anywho, thanks for joining us today as we talked about compliance. And
bingo.
Thanks,
Bingo.
Julian. Yes. Go ahead.
Yes.
Kellamvor, I can't say the username, and Mike the Maker won bingo today. So
Fantastic.
Woo, we're going to do that going forward. So
Great. I love it.
yeah, it's going to be fun. So pay attention. Join Discord if you haven't, right?
Join us there. Thanks for joining us. For PDQ, I'm Josh.
I'm Tara.
Thanks for joining our webcast today. And of course, to our bingo winners, send us your mailing info to webcast@pdq.com. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you back here next week.